It's a good story, but not for here.
You're blushing, Maxine.
And also in the village hall car park.
I'll tell you later.
We've seen it all. And in 2013, you successfully helped obtain funding to completely refurbish the Singleton Village Hall, which I know I've visited on a few times, and it is a lovely place now. And during your time in politics, worked with local residents to obtain grants for the improvement works in Puzzle Wood. So it's no longer a puzzle, is it?
It's no longer a puzzle,
Good,
no.
right. So you first started on the council on the 1st of May 2003. Does it seem a long time ago, or just like yesterday?
No, it passed very, very quickly.
Oh, this age, having fun. Yes, yes, all right, okay. And you sat on various committees and also working groups. Parish Liaison Committee, Art Service Review, Built Heritage Forum, the Crematorium Working Group. Right. I mean, there's always a place for that. You've been on the Development Control Committee, Licensing and Appeals, Policy and Service Review, Planning Policy Scrutiny, Development Control, Community Focus Scrutiny, Development Management, Policy Development, Planning Committee Substitute, Environment, Health and Housing Committee, Tourism and Leisure Committee. Well, seeing you've been on the Tourism and Leisure Committee, I'm sure you know what you're going to do with the time that you've now got free, if any. But can I just say, on behalf of the council, thank you for your civic life and the duty that you have performed for your residents on the borough, and it is much appreciated by us all. And thank you, Maxine.
Can I just...
Yes, you can
answer-
say a few words.
Not that I think I need this really, because of Foghorn, not known as Motormouth and Foghorn for nothing. But today has been very, very special to me, and if I get choked here, you're going to have to just forgive me. Mr. Mayor's entertained me and my family, because my daughter Rebecca and her family have driven down from Carlisle this afternoon, and I had no idea. I walked into the Mayor's parlour and my jaw literally did hit the floor, because I had no idea at all that they were coming. But of course it's been absolutely wonderful to have them here with me. I thought it would be John and myself and my two friends Pam and Derek. I thought and we ended up with a party. So Mr. Mayor has entertained us right royally with the most delicious afternoon tea. And I've been able to bring my family, because obviously my grandchildren living 100 miles away have never seen my mum's picture on the wall. They've never seen around the town hall, which I frequently discussed. But what I do want to say is that my 16 years here on the council were hugely enjoyable, hugely. It's only when I stopped coming that I realised how much I would have missed it, how much of my life it had become. And the first 8 weeks after that election, I sat and gazed at the wall. I didn't know what to do with myself. Anyway, I'm tormenting somebody else now, so that soon got over. But I've been so fortunate, because I've had the support of my residents, which, well, I'll say the majority. I'm sure there's somebody saying, oh, that woman. I'm sure that there has been some of those. But I've really had the support of the majority of my residents. I've certainly had huge support from Greenosh Parish Council and Singleton Parish Council. And my colleagues, of course, we can't say without including the Coven, who've been friends and support. But more than that, I've been so fortunate that the staff in this town hall have helped me, advised me, guided me in the right direction on so many occasions that too many to tell, and I have been so grateful to them. And I have, before I left, I did send thanks, but I will say again, Chief Executive, if anybody that you come across, and if anybody says about tonight, please say how much I have appreciated their help and their expertise. So it has been absolutely wonderful. I wouldn't have missed those 16 years for anything. And now I see you're sat here, I wish I was back here again. But anyway, I'm sure I'll recover from that. But in the meantime, I'll leave you to it. And you can all argue. Have a good argument. That's wonderful, and thank you very much for your generosity. Thank you.
Pleasure.
In fact, if the rates go up next year now,
Right, ladies and gentlemen, can I just say that since the last council meeting I've attended 35 events, and it's been a pleasure to attend them all, and especially when one was to Alan Clayton's mother-in-law's 100th birthday celebration. Yes, and she has a twin sister in Stockport who's also 100. So, yes. Right. Thank you, Alan, but when she looked younger than me, I thought, dear me. Can I say also thank you to all who attended my civic service at St Thomas's. It was very much appreciated. I think one of the most memorable visits that I've had, and I have the scars to prove it, was I visited Penny Farm, where Princess Anne was coming to open the new visitor centre and cafe extension. Well, I was giving this polo mint, I thought, to this horse, but it couldn't wait, and it got my finger as well. So as I was slowly going down to the girl next to saying, it's got my finger, and trying not to swear. Anyway, she opened the horse's mouth and I extracted my finger. I think he thought it was a carrot. So 2.5 hours for the walking centre, and having to have an anti-tetanus, which comes along with diphtheria and polio, you see now. So I'll be all right for a bit, I think. Okay. But it was really nice to be there, to see her and see the work that they do at Penny Farm. And I think I've just about recovered from that. Okay. It was a pleasure to be able to use the town hall to present special BP and Star Awards to the guides in the area, and I think they enjoyed the grandeur of this establishment. Also, last week we had 2 alderman presentations, and again it was a pleasure to be able to give a keepsake to the people who have given such good service to the borough. This afternoon, though, the deputy and I, we went to the Lancashire Best Kept Village competition, and we do have the results if anybody's in. Well, I'm going to tell you anyway, whether you like it or not. In the outstanding features, the Public Gardens, 4th place out of 15 went to Ray Green. The Cricket Ground, 4th place out of 9 went to Freckleton. The Bowling Green, Freckleton Memorial Park came 4th out of 12. The Shops, Lorenzo's was 5th out of 23. So that they did very well there, did Freckleton. Then we had the industrial and commercial part, which was 5th out of 10, was Threll Falls Transport. So I think we have a little bit of a connection there with Freckleton again. And then public playing fields, Elswick was 6 out of 21. Public building, Elswick was 6 out of 22. Then we had children's play area, Freckleton Memorial Park came first. Save the best till last. Places of worship, St Nicholas's Church, Ray Green came first.
Well done.
And the War Memorial at the Freckleton Cenotaph came first. So we did very well there. And then they have another category, which is the whole village results. And so in the champion villages, Ray Green came 5th. And in the large villages, Freckleton came 1st. So well done, Freckleton. Well done. Obviously, as Mayor, you do some fundraising. So I have been fundraising since the summer. Can I just say thank you to all who helped at the 1940s weekend. It was very enjoyable, hard work, but I understand from somebody that he was talking to Richard, or Richard was talking to him, I should say, but he was very impressed with Wild, even so.
That's okay then.
My Pim's Prosecco and Pudding event held at the town hall here was a sellout, and I think everybody enjoyed that. So I think I'll be doing something similar, of a similar theme later on. The quiz night last Friday that we held at St Paul's Church Hall, I must say thank you to Richard for organising this, for doing the questions, even some of them that we couldn't answer, but still, never mind. I think everybody enjoyed it, and along with Sheila and 2 other wonderful people in the kitchen, an enjoyable night was enjoyed by all. And how much did we make? Can you remember?
Just under £800.
Yes, so thank you for those who came. Future events, so please put these in your diary. I've got at the Town Hall on the 27th of November, I'm having a coffee morning to celebrate Lancashire Day. For those who didn't know it existed, not many people do. And then on the 10th of December, which is a Tuesday, I'm having a Christmas flower arranging event here, again at the Town Hall, and it will be held here in the chamber. Okay, so you'll be pleased to know that's the end of my my announcements, unless I've forgotten anything. No? No, you don't know. Right, thank you. So back to the agenda now. Okay. Item agenda 4, Chief Executive's Communications. Do you have any to report?
No, other than to thank Alderman Chu for her very kind words and to reassure that I will pass them on to all the employees. Thank you.
Hi. Agenda item 5, we have questions from members of the public. And there are 2 questions from members of the council on this occasion. And the first question has been received from Councillor Tim Armitt. Sorry? Oh, Councillor Hayhouse, did you have your hand up for some reason?
Mr Mayor, it's just that I've been stuck on the A585 tonight for 3/4 of an hour. I did have a notice of motion earlier on, but the fact is the police have closed the road in both directions. I've been sat in a 5-mile queue whilst they've been turning cars round individually. To make matters even worse, the diversion route round Greenhouse has also been closed because an HGV wagon has gone into a ditch. So we've got chaos down in my neck of the woods. So I apologise that I'm not here. I wasn't here for the notice of motion.
We haven't got to that yet.
No. Done it.
Sorry,
No.
preamble. I think we'll take that as read. You don't need to say it again. Right. So I would like to invite Councillor Tim Armitt to read out his question and remind him that a supplementary question is permitted, provided it is related to the response given to the initial question. So, Councillor Armitt, would you like to?
Many thanks, Mr Mayor, fellow councillors, members of the public. I'm really pleased to get the chance to answer this question. The town centre of St Anne's has been on the decline now for well over 5 years. J.R. Taylor's, Mooch, Olive Tree, B&M Bargains, Prezzo and 15 others in the town centre alone stand empty and abandoned. The choice for a shopper is so limited, few make it their destination of choice. The market is on a Thursday and is thus not available for most people at work. Can the council confirm what plans they have to improve St Anne's footfall, encourage businesses and save our town centre? And can they confirm which councillor has the lead on town regeneration?
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The council has asked a question specific to St Anne's, and I shall address the bulk of my answer to St Anne's. But I do think it's important to remember that we are borough councillors with borough responsibilities that includes 3 town centres in St Anne's, Lytham and Kirkham, as well as a number of smaller but important commercial centres dotted around the borough. Nationally, town centres, both large and small, have been changing over the last few years, partly as a consequence of the increase in online shopping and also the continued dominance of out-of-town centres. This has resulted in many towns seeing a reduction in the retail offer on their high streets. And while St Anne's is no exception, the vacancy rates are not as high as in many other locations. And I thought I'd take the opportunity tonight to just give you some figures from the 2019 Town Centre Survey by the Enterprise and Promotions Officer at the Town Council. In the Town Centre in St Anne's, there are 251 business premises. The closure percentage is 6.9% and the charity level is 3%. Compare that with Lytham, with 234 outlets, with a closure rate of 5.1% and a charity percentage of 4%. However, this council, my colleagues and certainly myself as a St Anne's councillor and town councillor, do not wish to see any vacant premises in St Anne's or indeed in any of our town centres. We therefore take every opportunity to encourage investment and occupancy. This includes working with local business partnerships that are established by local business for local business. In St Anne's, there is the St Anne's Enterprise Partnership STEP, where the private and public sector come together to pool resources and share ideas. We have senior borough councillors represented on STEP, as well as officer support, including an excellent town council officer whose brief includes enterprise and promotions. STEP outcomes form important reports back, both to the leadership board here and as a standing item on the town council agenda. Now, as I said, town centres are changing with the emphasis shifting from retail to leisure and everyday living. So looking at towns that have bucked the trend, there has been an increase in leisure, public realm and residential accommodation, bringing people back to live in the town centres. That in turn leads to a change in the services, provisions, primary health and community hubs. One of the policies we've been working on is to have a more direct dialogue with owners and landlords to see about opening up and using vacant upper stories. Central government has a part to play here in giving local authorities more powers to compel landlords to offer their premises up quicker and as a minimum requirement, whilst vacant, ensure that they are in a decent state of repair. This is an area I know that our MP is keen to progress and has raised this at ministerial level. I mentioned STEP earlier, but by harnessing local businesses who know the town best and lead and drive the initiatives in partnership with the borough and town councils providing support, advice and resource as far as possible, that is the way to progress. Over recent years, Fylde has secured millions in investment for St Anne's to enhance its reputation as an attractive destination for locals and tourists. And I refer to the North West Development Agency scheme, to Townscape Heritage and of course to 106. And this must continue to be a priority. Grant funding opportunities are continually explored for all of our town centres, with the latest success being Kirkham. where the business partnership, town council and borough council work together to secure approximately £3 million funding for regeneration initiatives. Why is that important? Because the lessons learned from this programme will be used to the advantage of the borough's other town centres in the near future. There are further regeneration schemes already proposed for St Anne's, including the enhancement of St Anne's Road West and a further section of Wood Street, which will be improved to a high standard, funded by Section 106 contributions and the Council's own capital programme. There is also a town centre management plan currently being prepared for each of the borough's town centres, which will include commissioning an independent town centre health check, which will provide detailed statistical indicators of such areas as footfall, vacancy rates, development uses, retail mix and offer, rental data, employment rates, commercial trends analysis, turnover rates, perception surveys, and of course benchmarking evidence against similar areas to see how we are doing. This is key information, as it will provide us with detailed and objective evidence-based data into the true state of our town centres, rather than basing our interventions on subjective opinion. All elected members have a responsibility to support the development and improvement of the area they represent. At Fylde, committees carry delegated responsibility, and the Planning Committee, chaired by Councillor Fiddler, makes decisions regarding regeneration, of which I know the Councillor is a member of that committee, and as such has an opportunity to lead with ideas. I also note in this question he mentioned the farmers' market. Now, we will make enquiries about possible change of days, but again, the market is here to enhance the shopping experience and not to take away from existing established businesses in the town. With any market, whether it be farmers or continental, that balance has to be struck. In concluding, the work in St Anne's is ongoing. With our partners at the Town Council and STEP, I believe St Anne's has a good opportunity to secure a solid future which can respond to economic and lifestyle challenges as they occur. I would ask, therefore, that all members get behind those officers, those trade groups, etc., to support the initiatives that I've outlined. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
I'd like to thank Councillor Small for such a detailed and precise answer. It was excellent. And you covered a couple of things in there which I think were great, and I would like to base my question upon what he's just said to me, please. Yep, the STEP group does a fantastic job, and the chair's just back from Australia and has brought some great ideas back from Australia as well, where she was visiting down there. And I agree with you that we do need to see more mixed stuff inside the town centre, rather than just retail. It has to be a combination. And I agree the planning committee also has to be involved in that as well. And I think we should, hopefully, all agree this is not a political issue. This is us working together for the best of our town and not putting party politics first. And it should be cross-council, and it should be based on the people who are in the areas all working as one. Traditional models don't work anymore, and we should look to change our policies in our planning area. Yeah, it's getting there. It's getting there. We look to change our policies so we can bring in retail without penalising people who want to build in the area. So the question then is, can we agree that we do put St Anne's Town Centre at the core of our plans for the next 5 years, and we create a cross-party working group to include the businesses, the retailers and STEPs, and the people with the expertise in the hotels, to simplify our policies that enable people to come to be able to build and change use simpler at lower cost, reducing the 106 costs if necessary, and can we consider all ideas, no matter how radical, that will be supported as soon as possible, given that we've had years of this decline.
Thank you for that. The short answer is yes. Great. I had a conversation with the councillor before the council meeting tonight. I have suggested that obviously he speaks to the chairman of STEP. He's more than happy to speak to me, And obviously, as you say, it's too big an issue, whether it's St Anne's, Kirkham, Lytham, or any of the smaller areas, just to be left to party politics. So from that point of view, yes, working together, I'll be happy to talk to him. And I'm always interested in this phrase he uses, out of the box thinking. So I'd like to get some examples of it. So thank you.
Can I just remind people about putting the microphone on when they are... I've been told off about it as well, so don't worry. Thank you. You can. My button presser can press that. Oh, well, I'll leave it on for a minute. Right. The second question has been received from Councillor Brian Gill. I would like to invite Councillor Gill to read out his question and remind him that a supplementary question is permitted, provided it is related to the response given to the initial question. Thank you, Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Hopefully you can see that the microphone is on. The corporate plan states that it contains objectives and actions to achieve and deliver excellent services and achieve the outcomes that our communities want and need. Whilst this is laudable, it is only as good as the measures that are put in place to show demonstrable progress and improvement. The corporate plan states as a priority under Clean and Green that it will deliver high quality parks and open spaces, with two actions: PM20, maintain increase green flag status for parks and open spaces, and PM77, percentage satisfaction with parks and open spaces. These are monitored by the Tourist and Leisure Committee. The goal of 6 for green flag status has been achieved. This in itself is a great success. The other measure is at 96%, which on the face of it looks exceptional. However, it is based on only one question in the customer satisfaction survey, to which only 431 people responded. Less than 1% of the local filed residents. Hardly a compelling number. With no way of knowing if the survey was even filled in by residents who actually use the children's parks, I motion that it's meaningless. Whilst the parks team endeavour to keep on top of the maintenance, this is limited by the budget constraints placed upon them and is therefore driven by a priority process. No noticeable updates to the parks have been made for some time, unless you count the proposed galleon to be installed in Ashton Gardens. South Park, Blackpool Road North and Waddington Road are just some of our local parks that are in need of urgent attention. I am sure other members could add to the list. Can Council please confirm that a plan is to be presented for approval that achieves the goals set out in the corporate plan for all the children's parks in the Lytham St Anne's area? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gill. I'll call on Councillor Karen Butley who will respond to the question.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'm delighted that Councillor Gill acknowledges the very good work of our parks team across the borough, and I would like to add my congratulations to them and for all involved for the achievement of 6 green flags. It is heartening too that there is such a high satisfaction rate from the survey responses, and whilst I note Councillor Gill's criticisms of the number of returns, I would not dismiss them out of hand. Rather, I would encourage more ways to gather feedback from both residents and visitors. Mr Mayor, the question only mentions Lytham St Anne's, but let's not forget that we have taken budget decisions in favour of parks outside of Lytham St Anne's, and I would like to explain the context. New councillors may not be aware that historically the parishes own their own parks and open spaces, and just a few years ago, at Kirkham Town Council's request, Kirkham's parks were transferred to their ownership too. This meant that the parishes were responsible for their upkeep and investment in all areas apart from Lytham St Anne's. But, notwithstanding that, this administration made a decision that all areas of the borough would have access to our parks team for their expertise and guidance, so that they could work with them in the parishes and villages to bring about improvements to their parks, which have led to successful bids for funds from Fylde. We have, I'm sure you will agree, some magnificent parks and open spaces right across the borough, not just in Lytham St Anne's, and we are keen to see improvements to all. Indeed, I would like to encourage councillors to engage in their communities with the people in their wards to test appetite for change. There is an established policy of working with the community via friends groups which ensures proper consultation and maximises the use of grants of Section 106 development monies and levers in support from the council. We have had numerous success stories using this approach, which again Councillor Gill may not realise given his short time on the council. But I think it's safe to say that over recent years, each budget council has agreed investment in parks. This is something worthy of acknowledgement given the financial climate across the country. And since receiving the question for council, I have had many members remind me of improvements to parks in their own areas as testament to the notable support of the Borough Council. And only this evening, Mr Mayor, we've heard again of a great success in Freckleton winning that competition for the Children's Parks area in the Memorial Park. Further plans for improvement, including budgetary requirements, will be brought to the Tourism and Leisure Committee, and I hope that Councillor Gill will support them. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Gill, have you got a supplementary question?
Yes, thank you. Just very briefly, my question was just specifically against Lytham St Anne's, because I am aware of what happens within the parishes. My colleagues have informed me while in my short term. Thank you very much as well. I appreciate that a plan will be coming forward. I would like to know the timescale, when that's going to be available, and what funds are going to be supplied to that development.
Thank you. I hope the council doesn't mind me indulging me on informing all new councillors of how parks and our parks team supports all areas of the borough. And in particular, with regards to the plans coming forward, then I would advise them to keep an eye on the next few agendas coming forward for the Tourism and Leisure Committee, because certainly any budget proposals will come before that committee, ready for Budget Council next March. Thank you.
Right, agenda item 6 is questions from members of the public, and one question has been received from Mr Moore. I would like to invite Mr Moore to read out his question and remind him that a supplementary question is permitted provided it is related to the response given to the initial question. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity, Mr Mayor. Good evening. It's a question about Lytham Institute and the assembly rooms and the move of the library. Lytham Institute's user rights agreement stipulated 12 months' notice in writing, and on the 19th of July, the County Council gave written notice to end it on the 19th of September. So, without a decision by councillors, your officers had used delegated powers to decide that just 2 and not 12 months' notice was needed. And that's probably forfeited income in the region of around £15,000. Separately, at the assembly rooms, the lease required the ground floor rooms to be available for public hire at fees subsidised by commercial income from the rest of the building. But again, using delegated powers, officers decided the Town Trust could sublet exclusive use of the Dickinson room, and a commercial bank could be granted exclusive use of another ground floor room and rear parking spaces, which has adversely impacted public parking, particularly for mobility disabled users who have to use that park at the back. These decisions reduced the areas available for public use and hire, and they significantly increased income to the Town Trust. but your officers appear not to have asked the district valuer about negotiating increased payments with the lessee on the council's behalf. Furthermore, it's not clear to me which of File's delegated powers has been relied on for each of the officer decisions for both the actual uses they agreed and for the income that should have been or was payable to or foregone by the council. So my question is actually a technical one. Which specific paragraph numbers in File's constitution gave an officer delegated authority to decide each of the actions and inactions that I have set out? Thank you.
Councillor Zackley, will you respond?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Short and sweet answer to this. Paragraph 4.17 in Part 3 of the Constitution, under responsibility for functions, provides delegated authority for the management of leases and agreements.
Mr Moore, do you have a supplementary question?
Well, there are actually two, if I may. It's the same two-part question because I didn't expect it would only be that paragraph. I thought there would be others. However,
One question.
right, one question. Here we go. I'm still puzzled about the Institute because, as I understood it, the councillors are the trustees of the Institute, not the officers. And I don't see how it could be possible for councillors, for the trustees of the Institute, to delegate that decision to officers without actually making a formal delegation motion. And that's especially important, if I may say so, when you consider that something like £15,000 has been withheld from the trust, because it's the trust's money, not the council's money, that has not been taken from the county council. And I didn't hear you say anything that said... Yes, I didn't hear you say anything that said the council had, in its role as trustee, delegated authority to officers to take that decision. And I wondered if I've misunderstood you or whether you actually think officers have delegated authority to take the decision on behalf of the trustee when they, as far as I can see, do not.
Mr Mayor, despite Mr Moore's belief that officers don't have the authority to deal with the questions, with the issues that he's enumerated in his first question, I am led to believe by our Chief Executive and the directors that, and the quoting the Constitution, it's quite clear to me that they do.
Thank you,
Burst into tears.
Agenda item 7 is a notice of motion that has been received from Councillor Roger Lloyd. Councillor Lloyd? Yes?
Mr Mayor, before you start with the notice of motion, could I declare an interest, because I wasn't here earlier on the basis that my parish council, it's a non-pecuniary interest, but my parish council accepted a few £100 about 5 or 6 years ago from Quadrilla for Britain in Bloom, I think it was. So I need to declare an interest on that, but equally, I would like it to be noted tonight that I'm withdrawing from the meeting at this stage, whilst this notice of motion is being considered, because I am a member of the planning committee at Lancashire County Council, and I obviously cannot therefore be in attendance at that advice by the legal officers of that county if this notice of motion is being considered. So I'm withdrawing from the meeting. I would like it obviously noted.
Right, thank you, Councillor Hayhurst. Been noted. Right, Councillor Lloyd?
Thank you, Mr Chair. The Environment Agency has wisely put stringent safety guidelines in place for the fracking industry, most notably the traffic light system. This system limits the level of seismic activity during the fracking process to 0.5 on the Richter scale. Over the recent 10 days of fracking leading up to the recent incident on the 26th of August, there were 38 tremors around the Preston New roadside recorded by the British Geological Survey. That works out at nearly 4 a day. At least 6 of these tremors were over the EA's guidelines of 0.5 on the Richter scale, and 4 of those were after fracking had stopped, which is of some concern. There is absolutely no question that these seismic events, including the 2.9 tremor on the 26th of August at 8:30 in the morning, were caused by the fracking process. The geology around the site, as many of you will know, is crisscrossed by numerous geological faults. No doubt many of you here tonight felt the tremor on the morning of the 26th of August, as I did. It felt like a truck had run into the side of my house. The true scale of the damage caused may never be known, but the leading seismologists of the British Geological Survey revealed that several hundred reports of damages were received. Quadrilla's Sam Schofield, head of external affairs, was sent out to investigate these claims and is still doing so, together with a colleague from Quadrilla's social media. They were not professional surveyors. Many of the damages were settled by them with so-called goodwill payments. Quadrilla apparently has not claimed any responsibility for the damages to many of the claimants. It has been pointed out that insurance companies probably won't even cover the damages caused by fracking. The notice that before you reads, in view of the recent and past seismic activity near the Quadrilla Preston New Road site, which has seen universal condemnation of Quadrilla's activities, I propose that this council urge central government to stop all further fracking activities in the file with immediate effect. This operation has repeatedly shown itself to be an unsafe industry, and that file residents and their properties are quite clearly at risk if operations at Preston New Road continue. Therefore, I would ask the Chief Executive to write from this council to the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom, requesting that there should be a permanent ban on all fracking activities in the Fylde, because the industry is unsafe here. The Chief Executive should also make it clear that Quadrilla's operations have caused widespread damage to private homes across the Fylde. And finally, fellow councillors, let us send this collective message to central government. This is an issue that transcends party lines. Our local MP, Mark Menzies, has called for a ban on fracking in the Fylde. This industry is not safe in the Fylde and must be stopped. Thank you. And I have a seconder.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Your notice of motion really should have finished at the end of Preston New Road continue. Anything else after that should not be
I did
included.
pause after that because it was something...
Well, it's not on the agenda. Thank you. So can I have your seconder, please?
Mr. Mayor, I'm happy to second that motion. Thank you, and reserve the right to speak further. Thank you.
Right, the motion is open to debate. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, whilst I agree in the main with Councillor Lloyd's motion, I'd like to make an amendment to it in the hope that it makes the motion more acceptable to all our colleagues and easier to action by the appropriate bodies. I know some people will say that 0.5 limit on the seismic activity was too low a threshold for the industry and called on the government to raise this. I'm pleased to say they stuck to their guns and kept the stringent regulations in place. Regulations that I might add were agreed by the industry. Yes, the industry took part in discussions when the regulations were set at a 0.5 limit for the traffic light system, only asking for it to be changed once the regulations stopped them in their tracks. I understand the suggested new limit by the industry was 2. Well, that wouldn't have worked either, would it? Seeing as soon after we saw a reading of 2.9. I wouldn't say, as Councillor Lloyd said in his motion, that there was a universal condemnation. In fact, I know a large number of Fylde residents have been happy to see how the operations went at Preston New Road, as long as regulations were adhered to. Clearly, Quadrilla have not been able to operate within the regulations, and to this end, I would like to make the following amendment, which I hope you'll be able to support. Following recent and past seismic activity at Quadrilla's Resources site on Preston New Road, this council calls upon the government to ensure the safety of Fylde Coast residents by continuing to uphold the stringent regulations currently in place on the shale gas industry. The industry has not been able to clearly demonstrate it can operate within these parameters and guarantee public safety. Therefore, this council also calls upon the Oil and Gas Authority to ensure all hydraulic fracturing operations in Fylde cease with immediate effect. Thank you. Sorry, I do have a second.
I'm just going to ask that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand to second the motion and reserve the right to speak.
Right, can we have anybody who wishes to speak on the amendment?
May I ask, Mr. Mayor, is that actually an amendment? It would be helpful to have it written down, really.
We did receive a copy, but I'm sure Councillor Green will read it out again if
It is quite
it
complicated,
is,
Mr. Mayor,
yeah.
and it's quite a bit to take in, so it would be helpful to have a... Can we adjourn this and perhaps get a copy for everybody, please?
Councillor Green, if we have a copy, which we can distribute to people and have a 5-minute adjournment to when they get the copies. Okay? Thank you.
It's got Councillor Lloyd's amendment.
Well,
Have they got the copies?
no, the photocopy's playing up now. So let's just get on with it. Ian's going to read it.
That's the trouble with photocopies.
Ladies and gentlemen, can you please take your seats? I think it must have known. Unfortunately, it seems the photocopier is not behaving itself. So Ian is going to ring. Oh, hang on.
Here we go.
See, it's made. Thank you.
I'm all right.
I'll share.
Yeah, we'll share.
We'll
Right,
share.
Right, councillors, I think you all had sight of the notice of motion, notice of motion, sorry, and the amendment. It is an amendment, and we'll be happy to read it out if anybody wishes,
You've got it now.
or we'll go on to make sure that it has been confirmed properly. So, Councillor Nash, can you just stand and confirm that you did second the amendment? Thank you.
I so confirm, Mr Mayor.
Yes, Councillor Gill.
Do I stand or? My only question on the amendment is if the oil and gas industry actually asks for a change, that's not sufficiently robust to actually stop that change going through. That's my only question.
Debate.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on the debate? Right. Yes.
Well, I think that it's obvious that the regulations put in place have restricted quadrilla. And in order for them to be able to make fracking successful, they would have to have those regulations relaxed. So I think it's quite right to say that that we should keep in place very firm regulations, and I would think that the government will be the body that would be asked to relax the regulations. And that's why I think it is important that we actually keep something in there which says that the government must be asked not to relax the regulations at all. I think that is absolutely important. There is an imminent energy white paper due to come from the government which suggests that renewable energy will be prioritised over fracking. Indeed, it's likely that the industry is set to be ignored completely. And that, combined with the fact that public concern over climate change is growing, make it less likely that ministers will continue to champion the fossil fuel industry. So I really do believe that the government would welcome no relaxation to this industry, and I think they are the body that can determine whether those regulations are relaxed. So I really think there should be some reference to the government in this.
Only
Well,
on the stringent regulations.
Only
bit.
on the stringent regulations. It's been suggested we contact the Oil and Gas Authority rather than the government. I do believe it is important to keep.
It's two different bits, really.
It's two different parts though, isn't it? It says it calls upon the government to ensure the safety of Fylde Coast residents by continuing to uphold the stringent regulations, but it's suggesting that instead of going to the government, that we should go to the Oil and Gas Authority. I can understand the relevance of that, but I also feel that the government should be involved as well. So if we're writing to the Oil and Gas Authority, I think we should also write to the government. And I do think that the mover of this amendment did want to ensure that it went straight to the Oil and Gas Authority, and I have no problem with that. But I feel at the same time we should be writing to the government.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to say? Yes, Councillor Nash.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. The restrictions in force at Preston New Road, which is the only site at the moment that has been hydraulically fractured, are the most stringent in the world. There are no less than 3 authorities and probably more that are involved there. There's nearly more safety officers at Preston New Road than there are people actually drilling. The Oil and Gas Authority was in fact set up specifically to oversee and ensure that safety was done for this vital industry. It's also backed up by the Health and Safety Authority and by the Lancashire County Council Management Development Committee that oversees it all. Therefore, the people to call on, which is in the amendment, are the Oil and Gas Authority, who are actually directly covered by the government and directly in touch with the government. And therefore, I don't see a problem with this amendment going through. Fracking, as they call it, or hydraulic fracturing, as other people call it, has been stopped. It's not happening. The equipment's been removed at Preston New Road. So, in effect, we are following what has already happened, but also actually influencing, because this council cannot dictate, it can only influence future operations at Preston New Road through the Oil and Gas Authority, which is the one that has to decide whether or not these operations can continue in the light of the things that have happened. And I'm afraid hydraulic fracturing is a bit like Marmite. Everybody has their own opinions around here. Some people are very much in favour of us finding another source of energy, and others are very much against it because of the local problems that they're having. But I would say that this amendment is what is needed in this case. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Nash. Councillor Buckley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I realise this amendment has only just been circulated, but I do think that it reassures Councillor Odes in what she's seeking, and I do think also it goes further than Councillor Lloyd's original notice of motion, because it's requiring two things. One, to call upon the government to uphold those regulations. So it's saying that we don't agree they should be relaxed at all. Uphold those regulations, and that's for the government to do. And two, to call upon the Oil and Gas Authority to ensure fracturing ceases in Fylde. So I do think it does give that comfort that Councillor Oates seeks, that the amendment is all that's required. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Buckley. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak? Yes, Councillor Lloyd.
Yeah, earlier on I mentioned the MP, for instance, and I have a quote from him here. It is clear that hydraulic fracturing is not suitable for the Fylde or the people of Fylde, and I will be writing to ministers and the Oil and Gas Authority. So he's written to ministers as well as the Oil and Gas Authority. So I think we should write to ministers as well as the Oil and Gas Authority to call for a full cessation of the shale and gas industry operating on the Fylde coast. So he has sent a very strong message. We should send a very strong message as well.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. Anybody else who wishes to speak on this amendment? Right, we'll go to the vote then. Yes. So all in favour of the amendment, please show. Is there anybody against? Any abstentions? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We now have to vote on the substantive motion.
Which is now accepted amendment.
Sorry?
Which is what we've just voted on, but it's
Which we've-
substantive.
Councillor Collins, yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Before we have a vote on the substantive motion, I'd like to propose another amendment by adding words. Oh, sorry. Now, before we vote on the substantive motion, I'd like to propose a further amendment by adding some words to the substantive motion. Those words are, and that the Chief Executive writes from this Council to the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom, requesting that there should be a permanent ban on all fracking activities in the Fylde because the industry is unsafe here. The Chief Executive should also make it clear that Quadrilla's operations have caused widespread damage to private homes across the Fylde.
Can we have a copy, please? And a seconder. Yeah. Councillor Collins, have you got a seconder? Yes. Councillor Lloyd. Thank you. Right, is there anybody who wishes to speak on this amendment?
Read it out again.
Mr Mayor, the amendment is to add to the end of what is now the substantive motion these words, and that the Chief Executive writes from this Council to the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom, requesting that there should be a permanent ban on all fracking activities in the Fylde because the industry is unsafe here. The Chief Executive should also make it clear that Quadrilla's operations have caused widespread damage to private homes across the Fylde.
Right. Yes, Councillor Heather Speak, you wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I wasn't going to speak tonight because I'm absolutely fracked off with fracking. But it would do no harm to add those words. Every little bit of support and help we can give and ask to stop this industry has to be the best way forward for the residents of the borough and beyond. And it's time that we all woke up and not smell methane, but smell the coffee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Speak. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this amendment? Right, well, yes, Councillor Green.
Thank you. I'm just a little bit concerned about the last bit. It's allegedly caused damage. We don't know the extent of the damage. Yes, I've seen photographs. I'm aware there are a number of complaints gone in, but not a lot of them are not proven yet. So, what are we basing that on? Thank you.
Councillor Armitt, you wish to speak?
It's exactly the same concern. We don't have legal proof.
Councillor Buckley?
Mr Mayor, it is exactly the same as well. And whilst we may all think that that is, you know, one has caused the other, it is yet to be proven. So I actually think the amendment that has become the substantive sends that very, very clear and strong message that we all want to send from Fylde.
Councillor Collins, do you want to speak now or do you want to sum up at the end?
I'll speak now, if I can, Mr Mayor. With the permission of my seconder, which was Councillor Lloyd, I'd like to withdraw the amendment and change it to a further amendment, taking out the word widespread and replacing it with the word alleged.
Councillor Rhodes, did you wish to speak?
If the wording's been changed, I don't know whether I have to speak. It's whether people accept the amended wording. But there is an investigation by the Oil and Gas Authority regulator into the relationship between shale gas exploration and the seismic activity, and the publication of their findings are imminent. So I just wonder whether we come back to this when that has been published, when we have proof that or not that the seismic activity has been caused by the fracking. And that was all I was going to say until Councillor Collins put his amendment forward. It is something that we could look at again if there is proof once it's been investigated.
Thank you.
Well, yeah. Well, we can vote on it.
Councillor Collins, because you wish to change your amendment, your seconder has to agree. Do you agree, Councillor Lloyd? Right, and then we'll put it to the... And then the council has to consent. So, all those in favour?
Consenting to change the word.
Consenting to change the word only. Right. All those in favour? All those against? Oh. the original wording we're voting on now. So, sorry?
Mr Mayor, so would it be possible to remove that, to continue with that amendment but make a further amendment to it with the wording alleged in it? In which case I'm happy to propose that.
And I'm happy to second it.
Mr Mayor, you can continue discussion of the amendment that's on the table at the moment, which is Councillor Collins' amendment as originally worded. Once that amendment has been disposed of, then if another amendment is moved and seconded, then that further amendment can then be discussed and voted upon. But you need to dispose in one way or another of the amendment that's currently on the table, Councillor Collins' amendment with its original wording first.
Right, councillors, so we'll go to the vote with the original wording, so that all those in favour of the wording on the amendment, please show. All those against? Thank you.
Can I put a further amendment? I haven't got it written down because I didn't have that one, but to add the word alleged.
And remove what?
Remove the word and remove the word widespread, sorry. Yeah. So, have you...
Mr Mayor, as I understand it, the amendment from Councillor Nulty is to add the following words to the end of what's now the substantive motion, and these are very similar words to Councillor Collins' amendment, but not identical, to add these words, and that the Chief Executive writes from this Council to the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom, requesting that there should be a permanent ban on all fracking activities in the Fylde, because the industry is unsafe here. The Chief Executive should also make it clear that Quadrilla's operations have caused alleged damage to private homes across the Fylde.
Have you got a seconder? Yes, Councillor Oates is the seconder. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this amendment? Yes, Councillor Buckley.
Just concerned about the words, because the industry is unsafe here. So do we consider that it's unsafe here but safe elsewhere?
Can we go to the vote, yeah?
Anybody else?
Is anybody else who wishes to speak on this amendment? Right, then we'll go to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against, please show. Yes, Councillor Collins.
Yes, Mr Mayor, can we address that by saying because the industry is allegedly unsafe here, so the same amendment with the word allegedly.
Remove here.
Yeah.
Remove here.
Councillor Collins, have you got a seconder? Thank you, yes. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this amendment? We'll go to the vote. Oh yes, Councillor Buckley.
It doesn't remove my earlier point that if it's allegedly unsafe here, then allegedly is it safe elsewhere?
Thank you.
Understanding the word he has been removed.
Okay. Yes, Councillor Dixon.
I think the use of the word allegedly twice in it just completely and utterly weakens it. Really does.
Thank you. Yes, you have a point to make. Yes, carry on. Yes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I know everybody's giggling, but I'm struggling to understand why the other side are not going with this, because all we're trying to do is make it even more robust than Councillor Green's original amendment. I really hope it's just not a party vote on this. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Has anybody else got anything they wish to say on this amendment? Right, we'll go to the vote then.
Is this Shirley Green's now?
No,
No, it's still on that one.
this is Councillor Collins' amendment, isn't it, that we're on?
This is Councillor Nulty's amendment, Mr Mayor.
Sorry.
Seconded, Councillor Collins' amendment, seconded by Councillor Silverwood. The Chief, which adds the following words to the end of the substantive motion, and that the Chief Executive writes from this Council to the Energy Minister, Andrea Leadsom, requesting that there should be a permanent ban on all fracking activities in the Fylde, because the industry is allegedly unsafe. The Chief Executive should also make it clear that Quadrilla's operations have caused alleged damage to private homes across the Fylde.
Right, okay, is everybody clear about that? We'll go to the vote. All those in favour, please show. All those against?
That's defeated.
Go back to the...
Speakers on substantive.
Any more speakers on the substantive amendment? No, thank you. We'll go to the vote then. All those in favour of the substantive amendment, please show.
That's carried.
That's clearly carried. Thank you.
Well, whilst I was... Sorry?
Before Councillor Hayhurst moves his motion, I would like to request that councillors refrain from naming specific companies during this debate. Thank you, Councillor Hayhurst.
I do think it's a bit difficult not to name a company, Mr Mayor, because it's a company that, that deals with the situation that we're looking at. In fact, today when I was sat on the A585 for 3/4 of an hour, I was just wondering about the fact that of Queensway, because I get about 60 odd emails a day, and a huge proportion of those are from people who sit on Queensway for nearly an hour every day. And some people spend even more time on Queensway. And the difficulty is that it is because of the fact that the link road has not been built and is still nowhere near being built, from what I gather. And whilst I do feel that I should mention companies, because the fact is that it all depends upon a certain company. And so I do intend to speak about a company. You will all remember that our friends Kensington Developments, back in 2008, I think it was, decided not to allow Farnborough Council to continue with its planning consideration, but to go for non-determination. And after several inquiries, the fact is that they were eventually given planning permission in 2012. One of the conditions of that was that they were to build the link road. In their evidence, which they gave to the inspector, Kensington said how terrible the situation was on Queensway. They also used the evidence from County Highways, County Highways had said at that time that 300 further developments down there would make it that Queensway would be completely oversubscribed. Since then, Kensington have been given 165 houses by this authority. At the same time, across the road, we have allowed 160 houses with regard to the Prebond site. We have allowed a pub to be built. We've allowed a booze supermarket to be built. And at the same time, no link road. But what has happened is that Weil Lane, which was one of the, which took some of the weight off Queensway, has now closed. So people are spending hours on Queensway every day. And I think part of that is the responsibility of this authority, because the fact is that we have allowed 325 houses to be built, when County Highways said that 300 was the maximum that Queensway could take. And that was at the time when Weil Lane was still operational. And that was before we allowed a pub. And that was before we allowed Booze Supermarket. So the fact is, Mr. Mayor, we are in a situation where people that we represent have got horrific journeys every day. I deal with people who tell me about, because we've also allowed Cropper Road to be built around that area, how they take the children to school in St Anne's and have to go both ways on Queensway and queue up on both ways. And they tell me it can take an hour and a half for them to get the children to school. And that's our responsibility. The other situation with that is the fact that we have, since Kensington were given planning permission back in 2012, we have agreed with them on numerous occasions to relax the conditions which were placed on their initial planning consent. I spent yesterday afternoon trawling through the planning portal, and it was application after application after application after application by Kensington to let them off the hook. And I feel that we've got to do something, Mr. Mayor, because the fact is that Kensington are taking us for a ride. Two major things which they applied for was back in 2013, they asked for us to remove the need for affordability to be on the first 300 houses. Then they applied for 66 houses in December, they were granted 66 in 2017, and a further 165 on October the 10th, 2018. I came in this council chamber on October the 10th, 2018, and pleaded with the planning committee not to allow that 100 houses. And what I said to the planning committee, because I was told that, well, a deal is just round the corner, it's going to be sorted out soon. And I said, I'll be back in 12 months' time. Well, a year and 4 days, and I'm back telling you that we are in the same mire as we were then. And yet we still have no policy to stop any further planning applications in St Anne's. We can pour more and more people on Queensway. We also don't have the industry. All right, we've got BAE, I accept that, but we don't have sufficient industry for all the houses that we're building. So what we're doing, we're putting more and more people on Queensway and the M55 because we don't have the industry where these people can work. And so every time we allow more and more houses to be built, and I'm sure Kensington will come back for another 100 or so, the fact every time we do, we're making people's lives a misery in this borough. And so I'm going to be told in a short period of time when Councillor Fiddler stands up that what I've suggested can't be done, that we can't have a moratorium with the national planning guidance. And I've got to say, I accepted that before I put the notice of motion forward. But I felt it was
Councillor Hayhurst, do you have a seconder?
I'll second it.
Thank you, Councillor Arnott. Right. Does anybody wish to speak on this motion? Councillor Gill and then Councillor Fiddler. And then
Thank you, Mr
Councillor
Mayor.
Oates.
I would just like to point out that the Planning Committee actually approved the filed Healthy Living Supplement planning document at the September meeting, which I would like them to refer to for any future developments in this area. Thank you.
Councillor Fiddler.
I want to first kind of draw attention to the fact that Councillor Hayes is absolutely right. I do stand to try and say whatever you've proposed isn't acceptable. Mr Mayor, I will be brief. There are three aspects to the notice of motion. One, to investigate the feasibility of introducing a moratorium policy on all new planning applications of 5 or more houses in St Anne's. 2, for the policy to be implemented immediately. And third, that such a policy would remain in force until work commenced on the St Anne's Link Road. So, Mr Mayor, I address all three in turn. In order to introduce such a new policy, robust evidence would be required in order to show demonstrable harm in St Anne's. And in my opinion, you would not be able to prove harm when considered against the golden thread throughout the development plan, which promotes the presumption in favour of development and the delivery of housing. And even if you could demonstrate harm, the policy could not be implemented immediately, for it would have to go out to public consultation, and I am sure it would be greeted with considerable objection. Finally, and the most important reason not to support this motion, is that its linkage to the construction of the Link Road is illegal in planning terms, and I'm going to repeat that. To link such a policy to the linkage to the Link Road is illegal in planning terms, and we, the local planning authority, would be deemed to have acted irresponsibly. And to act irresponsibly in planning matters, this is very serious. It invariably leads to significant financial penalties. And so, Mr Mayor, as a consequence of these, and for the reasons I have just given, I ask members not to support this notice of motion.
Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, I take note of what Councillor Fiddler has said, and he's absolutely right. However, I do have sympathy for Councillor Hayhurst. I think we all have developments in our wards which we're very disappointed by. I personally have one that I've taken up recently where a pelican crossing should have been provided for people to be able to cross a very, very busy bypass. And it's still not in place because the developer is playing around, not wanting to spend the money. I feel Councillor Hayhurst's frustration. And I know that we are all feeling it about various developments. What is wrong nowadays is that the developers seem to get away with murder when it comes to conditions. And I don't know what can be done, because as Councillor Fiddler has advised, we really can't do what's being requested here. But if there is anything that we can do in the future in relation to getting conditions actually put into place, I think we owe it to our residents. Because as Councillor Hayhurst is receiving emails about the conditions on Queensway, I'm getting residents onto me because they're not safe crossing roads. I'm sure we can all tell a story which is similar, and therefore if there is anything at all we can do in the future to ensure conditions are met by developers. They're very happy to make promises at the time they get their approvals, but they're not very happy to spend the money to put them in place. And I think that it is a message that really needs to go to developers. We're getting tired.
Thank you, Councillor Rhodes. Councillor Radcliffe?
Thank you. I think we all listened with great interest to Councillor Hayhurst's discourse, and probably most of us didn't need to be reminded of the chronology of events or the history of this particular project. Nobody is sitting in this chamber with any huge sense of satisfaction at the lack of progress. And frustrating is the word that has been used. Everybody shares that frustration. Indeed, some probably have gone to the next stage of feeling anger in terms of what is not happening. Where we have to be very careful is that if this notice of motion, in my opinion, was to make any significant difference to the outcome, indeed was to enhance the expedition of this particular project and deliver a project that, if you remember, under the original planning application, would have taken 10 years to deliver through trigger points and build-out rates. And this has been an attempt. I know some will smile and be cynical about the description of this as an accelerated delivery scheme. But indeed, that is what is being attempted here in very difficult circumstances. If I felt, and if any reasonable person felt, looking at this notice of motion, that it was more than an expression of frustration and a bit of an understandable rant on the part of Councillor Hayhurst, well, look at the text and analyse its potential impact. We have concerns about legality, and we also must have deep concerns about whether in fact this is going to be counterproductive. Because what you're actually doing here is, because of a particular project which some people, all of us, are unhappy with because it's not being delivered in the way that we'd hoped. Actually, by going down the road of a moratorium, you are actually stopping development. You are actually preventing development. And we've heard there is in planning an assumption in favour of development. So if this motion helped, I would have sympathy. My only sympathy is in sharing the frustration. Is this motion going to move things forward? Absolutely not. It has no contribution to make. I know you feel that it is a statement, Councillor Hayhurst, that probably says enough is enough, we've had enough. But it isn't actually going to have the effect that you want. Indeed, I would argue that it may be undermining current efforts to come and bring this project to a conclusion. So I make a distinction between sympathy and applying a bit of common sense. I cannot support this motion.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this debate? No? Then we'll go to... Oh, sorry, Councillor Hayhurst, do you wish to sum up?
I've got to say, I've got the response that I expected, both from Councillor Fiddler and also from the Vice Chairman of Planning. But the point is that Councillor Fiddler says that we'd be irresponsible if the Planning Committee would be irresponsible if we pass this. Isn't the Planning Committee irresponsible continually waiving conditions on Kensington's developments? It's not just this latest one, it was Cypress Point as well. We somehow Kensington seems to have a hold over this council, whereby they get planning permission and then they come back when there's a load of conditions and they start whittling them down, applying to this council to remove the conditions. And also, the fact is, isn't it irresponsible of a planning committee to keep pouring more into, when they've already poured a quart into a pint pot, isn't it irresponsible to continue pouring into that pint pot? And that is what we are doing. And I've heard the Deputy Mayor say that this could be undermining the situation with Kensington. He said the same thing on the 10th of October last year, and I said I would be back again. I think we all know what's happening. I think we all know, and everybody keeps coming to me outside the meeting saying, Paul, I agree with you absolutely on this. But the point is, we are in a situation where we've got no plan B, we've got no policy if this road does not go ahead. And whereas we were told that, well, it could take 10 years to build a road when the planning application was lodged. Well, it was lodged in 2008. We should have had the road by now if it had taken 10 years, and that road has not even been started. Not only has it not been started, but it's not been agreed, the money's not been put forward, and basically we could lose that road. And all I'm trying to say to you all, and I'm sure your emails are like mine, you will have people coming to you all the time telling you about the problems that they're experiencing daily. And it's about time this council started listening to those people. We represent those people. Those people are crying out for help. And if that road does not go ahead, then we are in an absolute mess in this authority.
Thank you. We'll now go to the vote. All those in favour of the notice of motion, please show. All those against, please show. The notice of motion is sorry, abstentions. Any? Right, that is clearly defeated. Thank you. Agenda item 9. The third notice.
Thank you, Mr Mayor and colleagues. The notice of motion that I put forward is that this council, one, is deeply concerned about the practice of developers selling on leasehold terms where A, residents are given no opportunity to purchase said leasehold at market price, B, leaseholds are sold on to third parties, C, ground rent costs increase well above initially agreed limits, and D, onerous terms are included in the leasehold which introduce unnecessary charges for mundane activities such as decorating, repairs and even pet ownership. And part 2, that this council calls on developers to sell all future houses in the borough as freehold or unfettered long leasehold at a peppercorn rent, and will look at future planning policy to see if priority can be given to developers offering homes on a freehold basis. I brought this notice of motion. No, it's not. I brought this notice of motion following the emergence of a series of issues with leasehold, which I've come across while working in the Member of Parliament's office. He's just written to 3,000 homes in this borough to get responses, and they are flying in thick and fast. It's clear the government is legislating in this area, which is an important part of this, with an all-party parliamentary group looking at legislation to prevent poor leasehold practices, but this will take time to come through Parliament. We now have a situation where developers on new estates are including onerous ground rent terms. While I and many others living in older properties have the luxury of paying a peppercorn amount, I think mine's £1.30 every 6 months, new estates have ground rents of several £100s and can be reviewed under any number of timescales, increasing by RPI or other indicators. These increasing fees affect property values, and some residents are clear that even when they finish paying their mortgages off, they will never really own their own homes. The rate of increase in ground rent will be akin to a second permanent mortgage for them and will prevent them ever being able to sell their homes to new owners. Developers are also selling the leaseholds on to third parties without giving residents the opportunity to purchase them first at a fair price. They sell them on to companies, which often, you'll be surprised, have a number of directors involved in the developer of the first site in the first place. They're doubling up, essentially. And then costs unfairly increase for residents. The other aspect of the leasehold issue is the onerous conditions contained within these leaseholds. These are issues which solicitors should be picking up on, but we have residents in Fylde living in homes who have to pay fees in the hundreds of pounds to be allowed to redecorate a room inside their own home, to put in new carpets in their own home, to replace, like for like, a boiler. There are even charges for some residents who wish to own a dog, and in one case from just outside our area, a charge for a family when their dog died. One leasehold firm operating in Fylde now charges homeowners the princely sum of £120 if homeowners contact them and ask if they need to pay a fee for any works on their homes. That's £120 before they get told how much they have to pay to decorate the front room. None of the works I've mentioned have any cost implications for leasehold owning companies. The charges are an abomination, treating residents as a cash cow. And we then have the issue of leasehold. This is a situation where residents have opted to stump up thousands of pounds to purchase their leasehold. They receive their leasehold agreement back, minus the ground rent, but find they still have to abide by the onerous conditions and charges I've just listed. It is, put simply, another con. Not paying these charges leads to court action, and we've already seen a case in London of a leasehold company winning for non-payment. This did not lead to the homeowner being told to pay the ludicrous charges and some legal fees. It led to the owner defaulting the property to the leasehold company. I've brought this notice of motion as a member of the planning committee. In honestly, I don't think we can probably legislate in this way. However, with the government legislation coming through, I've worded it as the notice asks that we examine the possibility of giving preference to freehold properties. It's my understanding that you'll see that coming through from government shortly. If my fellow councillors support this notice, while the government legislates in this area, it at the very least tells developers that we know what their game is, that we're suitably unimpressed, and that they will be under extra scrutiny whenever they put in an application to build homes in Fylde. Thank you.
Councillor Dixon, do you have a seconder?
I do. Councillor Rourke.
Mr Mayor, yes, I'd be pleased to second Councillor Dixon's motion and would reserve the right to speak further. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Oates.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Well, really, it was just a question, and Chris has partly answered it already. Can we actually do this? I just wonder at the present time whether we could do it. And I have heard what he said, that we may be getting legislation through that will allow us to. And I wonder therefore whether this is a little premature, but I do fully support exactly what he said, and I think it's something the council should do, but can it do it at the present time?
Yes, thank you, Councillor Oates. Councillor Hayhurst.
Well, Councillor Oates has just said, taken the words out of my mouth, actually, because obviously we heard Councillor Fiddler saying it would be illegal to do what I was proposing in the notice of motion. I'm sure he's going to say exactly the same thing about the fact that we give priority to leasehold. I'm sure it's a freehold. I'm sure we're going to be told that that is the same thing. But I fully support what has been moved.
Councillor Fiddler.
It would seem I'm forced into a role of being a killjoy.
That's a surprise.
Comes as no surprise. There's something very similar to both notices of motions, isn't there? The frustration that Councillor Hayes described in detail and eloquently, but then relied on a planning scenario to try and promote his case, and similarly with Chris Dixon. I think we all share the same horrors that have been reported in terms of leasehold against freehold. But again, to try and use planning to bolster that case is, again, at the present time, and we look forward to any national legislation that comes through. A question was asked of me earlier, why is it that planning can describe various tenures when it deals with planning? And the simple answer is that the government have taken the lead And through the Government Act of Parliament, the National Planning Policy Framework allows different tenures as they describe. And so soon as government comes along, anticipated by many, to deal with this problem, planning really can't help, because the bottom line with planning is planning, it deals with the land use, it does not deal with land ownership. And that's a very simple, fundamental statement I'm making. But I do sympathise with the context of which he made it, Chris.
Thank you. Councillor Withers?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's no doubt this is a growing national scandal. The amount of traffic you see on social media and in the mainstream media attests to that. It seems to be rather more common in the northwest of England for some reason. But I think it's dishonest and immoral to purport to sell a property while retaining the leasehold. To bury in the small print of the sale documents provision for not only charging substantial ground rent, but also the right to increase it every 5 years or so, until it can, in some cases, exceed £10,000 per annum. It smacks of sharp practice and flies in the face of natural justice. Many people who've fallen foul of this injustice now find themselves unable to sell their property because buyers will not look at a house that is subject to these onerous, not to say rogue, leases. Most people's ambition in life is to buy their own house. It gives a sense of belonging, of security, and a stake in society. It's hard enough for young people to get on the property ladder, and this creates a further obstacle and acts as a deterrent. This country is seen and admired throughout the world for the integrity of its property rights. Not for nothing is the phrase, an Englishman's home is his castle. As Conservatives, we've always supported a property-owning society, going back to Margaret Thatcher's hugely successful and popular sale of the council houses in the 80s. We have to stand up and protect our residents from unscrupulous developers who arrogate to themselves rights which drive a coach and horses through the long-established principle of inalienable property rights.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A lot of this has been said, so I'm going to be brief. It's a real pity, but both these notices of motion actually, I think, really evoked a lot of support around this chamber tonight. As has been said, this is a scandal. We might not be able to do anything with it immediately due to planning laws, but we must send a strong message out, because most of these people that are caught in this trap are first-time buyers. First-time buyers, and think about it when you bought your first house, scratching around for a deposit, getting on the ladder, and then you find you've got this rope around your neck, which you're going to have for years and years, frankly, making your house unsellable. I have immense sympathy for a lot of young people. As Mrs Oates knows, my two children are both in that area as first-time buyers, and when they first moved into their houses, these schemes were actually prevalent. Fortunately, the developer had a change of mind, but it gave them immense worries when they were suddenly being faced with massive bills that, frankly, they couldn't afford to pay. So I appreciate we might not be able to actually do any firm action, but we've got to keep on about this until central government actually legislates. Thank you.
Councillor Berkeley?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I really do support this notice, and I know there's been some reservations mentioned this evening, but I wouldn't want us to delay in actually raising this issue further and get it before the Planning Committee when it determines policy. It's already been mentioned that the government is wanting to act against this practice. And I also, in looking at what other councils are doing, came across the fact that Liverpool City Council have banned this practice, and I'm not sure how they have done that, but I think it's worth us really exploring this further rather than to not go ahead with it. I'd like to see what possible action we could take, and whether that be encouraging the developers that develop in Fylde to sign up to a national list which has already been compiled of those developers that will agree not to undertake this sharp practice. And also, members will remember when under a cabinet system we used to have scrutiny committees, And we would examine these issues very closely. And now under a committee system, it's planning that would do this. So rather than, I think, put up the barriers we can put up this evening, I'd rather we explore every avenue, because I think right across the chamber, we agree with the sentiment. We don't want people to suffer under these really scrupulous practices. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Andrews.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In my ward, we've had a nice new development, lovely houses. The people moved in and they're very happy, and all went well for a few months. And then I started to get emails, probably as much as Councillor Hayhurst, and these problems began to come out one after another. I asked these people, well, what was your solicitor doing when you purchased your house? Didn't he spot these things? Oh, they said we weren't allowed to use our solicitor, we had to use a developer's solicitor. I don't know how true that is. I do know the people that have moved into these new houses need every bit of support that we can give, as often as we can give it, until the law is changed.
Thank you. Councillor Armitt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't think there's anybody going to disagree with Councillor Dixon. It's a great notion of motion, and also with what Councillor Buckley said. So in that mind, is it possible to propose just a slight amendment to it so that we make Councillor Fiddler happy, and that we drop the whole of number 2, and then we put in this council records that it is deeply concerned. We keep all number 1 and just drop all of number 2, so we're not making any challenge to developers, but we actually make sure that it's actually logged that we are very annoyed. I said it out loud.
Yeah, just a minute. Councillor Armitt, if that is an amendment, have you got a seconder for that? Councillor Dixon wants to speak, but he's not.
He can speak to the amendment.
Right,
yeah.
okay, so we'll speak to the amendment then. Thank you. Yes.
Well, I did write an amendment which I've handed to the Chief Exec, and really I believe that we should be calling on the government to get urgent legislation in place to enable this council and all councils in the land to be able to stop this practice by developers. I don't know whether that is incorporated in what Councillor Armitt wanted to put as an amendment, but I do believe that we're in the hands of the government on this, and they need to take urgent action to put people out of their misery. As has been said, I think we all agree with the sentiments of the original notice of motion, but at the moment we can't do anything about it to make anything be put in place very quickly. So I think the government are the only ones that can really do that. So I'd urge really the council to just add that to any amendment and to ask the government to act urgently.
Councillor Dixon, do you want to speak to the amendment?
I'm going to fight for it. The reason I worded part 2 as it was is because it doesn't actually really tie the council into any specific action. It says calls on developers to sell all future houses in the borough. That's us asking them a question. We've already seen that many developers are changing tack because they know the government legislation is coming through. So that's why I put those words down there. And then all the rest of that line just says, and we'll look at future planning policy to see if priority can be given. It's not suggesting that we do that. I think the difficulty with Councillor Hayhurst's motion before was that it was to actually ask for a moratorium. This isn't. This is looking at the possibility with future planning policy. If nothing can be done, then nothing can be done. We've still fulfilled the obligations down in the notice of motion. That's all. Thanks.
Councillor Fiddler.
Just to say, Mr. Mayor, I appreciate Councillor Tim Armitt's wish to make me happy this evening. Little else has done so. I agree with the amendment. I understand, Chris, what he's trying to do in terms of leaving paragraph 2 in the notice of motion. But you've already admitted it's not the avenue to deliver our concern. And it's obvious to most, I'm sure, that it's a question of Westminster legislation rather than hoping that at some time planning could kick in to deliver something which we are very dubious about. So I would support any wording which substitutes for paragraph 2 and says we lobby Parliament. We are so concerned, the procedure leasehold against freehold, the horror stories, we must write to Parliament and say accelerate this as quickly as possible. So I agree with the amendment as described by Councillor Oates.
Councillor Gill.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I fully support Councillor Dixon's proposal, and I think the amendment actually waters it down. I would expect us, and I actually support Councillor Buckley here, because we really ought to do a little bit more for the people who get them in this situation. For example, advice could be provided. We could actually do some work around this within the council to actually support people who are buying these properties, rather than just leaving it to their own devices. There is lots of other advice, citizens' advice, that actually helps. We maybe ought to point people in directions. So maybe that wording in the second part is not the correct wording, but I don't think we should just walk away and just particularly say nothing. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley.
I'm a little confused, Mr Mayor, on what amendment we're talking about. There seems to be some disagreement between Councillor Armitt and Councillor Rhodes. But, thank you. Well, if that's the case, Councillor Armitt's amendment just loses completely any of its teeth, because it takes away part 2, which is the action, which is what we want to do something about it. And it just leaves us with being deeply concerned. Well, of course, we're all deeply concerned, but if we go with that amendment, we're doing nothing about being deeply concerned.
Right, Councillor Aitken.
In sympathy with all of this that's here tonight. However, I do feel as though it should be debated in planning committee and should be passed over to them for extra thoughts and extra considerations. That's all I wanted to say.
You want to say something? Councillor Redcliffe.
I feel that with the second clause of this particular motion, I take the point that it doesn't tie us, but what it does call upon us to do is to at least explore some options and to ask the question. It's quite possible that we end up in a cul-de-sac or we can't go anywhere with this. But I think in itself, if we ask the question of developers, and if we look, let's be fair, look at the words, we'll look at future planning policy to see if priority can be given. Okay, the scenario might be quite negative that this isn't going to happen. But I think it's sending a message out that we need to challenge some established sort of values here. Because this is a very serious topic that affects large numbers of people. I mean, I have heard words like disgrace, etc. Now, I can't promise that planning policy will deliver the outcomes that people want, or that developers will respond to any overtures that we make to them. But I don't think it's a bad thing that we put the question. If you don't put the question, you'll never get the answer. So I would support the motion as it stands.
Right, thank you, councillors. We're now going to the amendment that Councillor Armitt proposed.
Do you want it clarified?
Do you wish to have it clarified? No.
As we understand, Councillor Tim Armitt's amendment was to keep number 1, remove number 2. That was his amendment, that was seconded, and that's what we've been talking to. That's what you're voting on. And we're back in the same ground as we were on the last notice of motion, where if you want to, let's get rid of this one first, and then see if there's any other amendments.
Right, so we're going to go to the vote now on that amendment. So all those in favour of the amendment, please show. All those against, please show. Right, I think that is clearly carried. Any abstentions? 2, 4. Right. Thank you. Still clearly carried. Any more amendments? Yes, Councillor Rhodes.
Right, it is that the government be urged to pass legislation to enable this council and all councils to take urgent action on this very important issue. Losing number 2, sorry. Yeah. Remove number 2 and put that in its place, please, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on... Sorry, have you got a seconder? Thank you. All right, Councillor Armitt. Is there anybody who wishes to speak on this amendment? Yes, Councillor Fiddler.
There was a gasp when I said I supported results. But in this instance, I think the amendment will deliver what we want far more than a wishful thinking in terms of a very hazy planning policy.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Butley.
Mr. Mayor, the problem with the amendment is that it takes away any responsibility right now on this council to take action, because it's calling on the government to fix this. We know the governments are already moving along that pathway, and they wish to legislate to fix this. Goodness knows how long that will take. And so the problem with what was being suggested is that we're all deeply concerned, and we're going to ask the government to fix it. That's the essence of the amendment before us from Councillor Oates. I'd like us to take more action than that.
Councillor Green. Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this amendment? Councillor Dixon, do you want to sum up then, please?
Yeah, don't vote for it. No, I think, I really still stand by point 2 that I put down there. I think it's, this council should be calling on developers. We know what's coming through from the government. We know that that's on its way already. That's a given. I just want this council to be seen to be doing what it can do for residents in this area. And all that part 2 asks us to do is to ask developers to sell homes as freehold. We're just asking them to. At least people can see we've done that. And to look and see, with future planning policy coming from the government, which we know is on the way, to see if priority can be given to developers. So, that's it.
Right, anybody else has anything to say? No, we'll go to Councillor Oates' amendment then. Okay, all those in favour, please show. All those against, please show. I'll get it right, that amendment is defeated.
Anybody else want to talk on the motion?
Is there anybody else who wants to talk on the motion?
Or an amendment?
Or an amendment? So we'll go back to the notice of motion for tonight.
The original.
The original one. All those in favour, please show. All those against? Any abstentions? Thank you, that is clearly carried. Right. Okay, item 10 on the agenda. I'd like to invite Councillor John Singleton to introduce this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You'll be pleased to know this isn't a notice of motion. Mr. Mayor, the Constitution Review Working Group, consisting of a cross-party membership, has met several times in order to update the Constitution. In fact, the last time the Audit and Standards Committee brought a report to Council was in December 2018. And that was on the subject of remote access to meetings. Since then, 2 reports were brought to the Audit and Standards Committee, one on the 30th of July and a further report for clarification on the 19th of September. The reports which come before you tonight have been recommended for approval by the Audit and Standards Committee, and these concerns Part 2, Part 3 and Part 4 of the Constitution. Now, these amendments can be found on pages 14 to 20 on tonight's papers. And I'll just read out the amendments which have been approved. So turning to page 14, which refers to Part 2, Article 13, and the wording "or general administrative convenience" has been deleted. Remaining on page 14, para 1305, we have added some wording. The wording is subject to action to section 101/2, that's paragraph 2 of the Local Government Act 1972, applying which allows any committee of the council to arrange for any of its functions to be discharged by an officer of the authority. I have a paragraph which details all that, but those are those amendments. Turning to page 15 is Part 2, Article 15, and that's public speaking at meetings of the council and its committees. With reference at paragraph 1502, that's subparagraph 3, 2 changes. We have changed the maximum of questions from 4 to 5. Furthermore, any such questions may now be submitted to the Chief Executive Officer, Director of Resources, or a member of the governance team, as opposed to solely the Director of Resources. Page 16 refers to Part 3, Responsibility for Functions, final paragraph, which is the recovery period. Now, the recovery period in relation to decisions and the 6-day working has been amended. The recovery period has changed from 6 working days commencing with the day of the meeting that made the decision. That has been changed to 6 working days commencing with the day when the draft minutes of the meeting are posted on the council's website. Page 17 refers to Part 4, Rules of Procedure. That's Article 11, Notice of Motions. And I refer to para 11.1b, and that's giving notice. And these changes are any member of the council can give written notice to the Director of Resources of a motion they wish to move. That recommendation is changed to any member of the council can give written notice to the Director of Resources or a member of the governance team in his or her absence of a motion they wish to move. The report does say her absence, but we have agreed to change that to his or her. Part 11.1, paragraph C. This is about members who give notice of motions but can't attend the council meeting in person. That's to present the motion. Now, officers suggested the motion could be moved in their place should they become unable to attend the meeting for a valid reason, agreed by the Chief Executive or the monitoring officer in consultation with the leader. We questioned that, and we could not, there was many valid reasons. So in the end, we decided to move the responsibility of qualifying non-attendance from officers to the council. So para 11.1c, the recommendation now reads, only a member who gave written notice of a motion under this rule may move it at the council meeting, unless the council indicates its assent to another member moving it in their place. So the authority is moved from the officers to council. Page 18, not many to go now. Part 4, rules of procedures. Only a slight change. This is regarding amendments and the reading out of amendments. The changes are: a written copy will be accepted during the meeting so that officers can read it aloud. That has been changed to: a written copy will be accepted during the meeting so it can be read aloud. So that can be either officers or you, Mr. Mayor. Page 18, again part 4, rules of procedures. Para 24, para B. Substitutes at planning committee. This concerns substitute on the planning committee, and on advice from members of the planning committee, we are recommending to delete the whole of paragraph B. Paragraph B to be deleted from the Constitution. No member may act as a substitute at a meeting of the committee if he previously acted as a substitute at 5 meetings of the committee during the municipal year. And all subsequent paragraphs have been amended accordingly. The last page, page 20, that's part 4, suspension and amendments, para 28.2. Amendments, we have recommended the additional wording in this paragraph, which is, except where it is a result of a proposal put forward by the Audit and Standards Committee or a proposal from the Chief Executive or Monitoring Officer in accordance with the provision 1305, amendments and alterations generally. I discussed that at the first, at the opening of the wordings. This again refers to Local Government Act 1972, Section 1, Paragraph 2. Mr. Mayor, I recommend the Council approve those aspects of Part 2, Part 3 and Part 4 of the Constitution be amended in accordance with the highlighted changes. And I do have a seconder, Mr. Mayor, in Councillor Nash. Thank you.
Thank you.
I second the motion and reserve the right, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Does anybody wish to speak? Yes, Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be brief. I don't wish to speak against anything that's in the report. What concerns me is something that the working group didn't look at, and that was procedure rules for committees. Now, I've been in some committee meetings that have been truly appalling. And I think if the debate rules for committees were looked at and tightened up, they would only improve the quality of debate. So, Councillor Singleton might be pleased to hear I might be bringing a notice of motion to a future meeting of this council.
Tell me before, then I'll have the tea.
Anyone else wanted to speak at the back? Sorry, I didn't. Hardy. Oh, sorry, Peter Hardy. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. It's just on page 19, item 24, substitutes. You mentioned it earlier Mr Singleton, but if he will be absent, so can that be amended to he or she?
Are there any more speakers? No. Councillor Singleton, do you wish to do some then?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And can I thank Councillor Collins for his comments, something which I did expect, and I'm sure I will be interested in seeing what those notice of motions are. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Right, so nobody, we'll go to the vote then. All those in favour, please show. Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? It is clearly carried. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr Mayor. I'd like to move the item on members' allowances. Recommendations are set out for you on page 21, and the recommendations are brought to this council from the Independent Remuneration Panel, which has a statutory function. It is making recommendations to increase some of the allowances for this council, and also increase the allowance paid to the 3 independent persons. I have a seconder for this in Councillor Settle. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm very happy to second this motion.
Right, does anybody wish to speak on this item? Councillor Clayton.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. There's some verification, if you could assist me with this before we go to the vote. If we look at the recommendation before us, and then we look at Appendix 2 of the recommendation from the Remuneration Panel, there seems to be some confusion or some ambiguity about the Vice Chairman. On the recommendation from the Remuneration Panel, there is some suggestion that that has a Vice Chairman amount of, I can't remember the exact figure, 800, I think, and so pounds. So some verification, if I could, Mr Mayor, to find out whether the Remuneration Panel recommendation should have been included in the recommendation at item 11, or whether the recommendation item 11 has been put in place, taking that into consideration. And may I ask another question in a moment when I've had the answer to that, Mr Mayor?
Councillor Hardy, I think it was, wasn't it? No? Sorry, Councillor Armitt.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I just wonder if this time, when we've got quite a lot of food banks around on the Fylde, we've got 23% of our kids on pupil premiums in the schools. We've got, as all the St Anne's councillors will know at the moment, all the lights have failed in Ashton Gardens, and you can't use Ashton Gardens after 5 o'clock now. It's just totally unsafe. We've got no budget allocated to fix that. If this is a time that we really do need to just give ourselves another £16,000 rather than actually spend it on things we can do more in the community, and it would show some good leadership if we just said, no, we won't take this, we'll give it back to the community and to Fylde.
Is there anybody else who wishes to speak on this item? No? Thank you. Do you wish to sum up then?
Thank you. Just to try and assist Councillor Clayton, I believe that what's in Appendix 2 should be included in the recommendation. I think it is included in the recommendation. I'm struggling to see a discrepancy as the allowances are all listed. There's also the second part, little bullet point 2, about the level of travel and subsistence allowances. And then 3, it does talk about the independent persons, suggesting it to be increased. And then overall the costs of that. So I am actually struggling to see if there's an error, but my understanding is the recommendation that is on page 21 is the recommendation that is before this council for us to approve. And Councillor Armitt's point, I take on board what he says. All I would say in response to that, with the allowances proposed to go up next April, it will be 5 years since they last increased. Thank you.
Right, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just really following on, because Councillor Buckley says she's a little bit unsure. If we look on page 22, the third line up from the bottom is saying Vice Chairman of above from £812.50 to £865. I think where the possible confusion or clarity is required is then if you look on page 33, the penultimate line then says Vice Chairman of above, so it just skews it a little bit. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Councillor Buckley, do you want to answer that for clarification?
Thank you for pointing that out. I can see where the discrepancy is. I'm reading that it's a slight typo, that they've omitted the present amount of 812 to 50 and their proposed amount to 865. That's how I read it. Thank you.
Sorry. It's what I think is it's only because the Vice Chairman of above on page 33, that's everything above it, and the only line below it is the leader of each political group. Whereas on page 22, the Vice Chair of above goes above the line saying Chairman of Member Development Group. So therefore, does the Vice Chair of the Member Development Group receive this proposed £865?
Can we ask the officers to clarify?
Yes, sorry, we understand now. Thank you, Councillor Silverwood. The Vice Chairman of Member Development doesn't get an allowance. Is that right? Yeah. Yep.
Sorry, yes, Councillor Armitt, is it for clarification, is it?
It's just asking on the vote if we could have a recorded vote, please.
You do need 6 other people to back you for that. Okay, thank you. 2, 4, 5, 6. All right, thank you.
Mr Mayor, just for clarification, could you just confirm, therefore, that the recommendation is contrary to the recommendations, the recommendation from the officer is contrary to the recommendation by the committee, which is quite clear in the page. If that's the case, then fine. I just want to know which it is.
What we will confirm is the recommendations are as your paper is page 22. It's not.
It's a follow-up, Mr Mayor. If you remember, I did mention that I had 2 points, and if you permit me to just raise the second point, and that is that in paragraph 5 of the recommendations, we talk about the Chairman of Public Protection and Licensing. For my way of thinking, those are the very, very important committees, and my question is in relation to those. Are they separated out, i.e. do both those committees, the chairman of both those committees, is that the total of the 1625 as it stands now, or is that per committee?
Mr Mayor, the recommendation is that the chairman of the Public Protection Committee receives that allowance, and the chairman and the vice chairman as well of the licensing committee receives that allowance. Traditionally, by convention, they are the same person, but if they were not the same person, they would each get the allowance set out in the order paper.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, it's sort of not really directly related to this, but on the aid memoir we've all got in front of us, under point of clarification, it says there is no such thing as a point of clarification. Could I ask for some clarification on that, please? I'm not being facetious. Thank you.
I think we'll get back to you on that, okay? We've had a summing up by Councillor Butley, and so we will now go to the vote. So all those in... Sorry, a recorded vote, thank you. So we will then get Ian to say the name.
Yes, this is for, against or abstain on the recommendation which is set out in the order paper. So Councillor Aitken, Councillor Andrews, Councillor Anthony, Councillor Armitt, Councillor Brearley, Councillor Brickles isn't here, Councillor Buckley, Councillor Clayton. Councillor Delmer Collins. Councillor Peter Collins. Councillor Dixon. Councillor Fazakerley. Councillor Fiddler. Councillor Gaunt. Councillor Gill. Councillor Green. Councillor Griffiths. Councillor Hardy. Hardy. 4. Councillor Harris. Councillor Harrison. Councillor Hayhurst. Councillor Henshaw. Councillor Hodgson. Councillor Jakes, the Mayor.
4.
Councillor Kirkham. Councillor Lee. Councillor Little. Councillor Lloyd. Councillor Morris. Councillor Nash. It's Councillor Ed Nash. Councillor Sally Nash Walker. Councillor Nixon. Councillor Nolte. Councillor Odes. Councillor O'Rourke. Councillor Redcliffe. Councillor Rigby. Councillor Saywood. Councillor Settle. Councillor Singleton. Councillor Silverwood.
Against.
Councillor Small. Councillor Speak.
Against.
Councillor Thomas. Councillor Threlfall. Councillor Trudgill. And Councillor Wilder. And Councillor Withers, who wasn't on my list. I'm sorry, Councillor Withers.
Right. Right, thank you, Councillor.
32 for, 15 against.
32 for, 15 against. Agenda item 12, the appointments to outside bodies. I'd like to invite Councillor Sue Fazakerley to introduce this item.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, colleagues. As we all know, programme committees make recommendations for representation on outside bodies relating to their brief, and the majority of those nominees were appointed at the July meeting of the Council. However, for reasons stated in the order papers, 2 appointments were referred back to the relevant committees in September, and following those committees' recommendations, we are this evening proposing that 1. Councillor Ray Thomas be appointed as the Council's representative on Lytham Town Trust, and 2. Councillor Ben Aitken, together with Councillor Viv Wilder as named substitute, be appointed to serve as the Council's representative on the Police Crime Commissioners panel. These appointments are for the municipal year 2019-20. Mr Mayor, I would like to move these recommendations, and I have a seconder in Councillor Buckley. Thank you.
Mr Mayor, I second the proposal.
Have we got anybody who wishes to speak on this item? And we'll go straight to the vote. All those in favour, please show. Oh, thank you. All those against? Any abstentions? Okay, that is clearly carried. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Right, it's been a long night.
Yeah, I think I might be considered as well.
Is the keeper gone?
Thank you, Councillors.
All right.